Open your cerebral cortex and shift your lobes into upper beta phase, because you are going to have Bitcoin knowledge transmitted directly into your vestibulocochlear. Your host of Bitcoin Knowledge is Trace Mayer, an early Bitcoin advocate since it cost $0.25, but this is not intended to be investment advice. A doctor of jurisprudence, but this is definitely not legal advice. And an investor in core cryptocurrency infrastructure, including Armory, BitPay, Kraken, and Mitagio, but this is not a recommendation of those services. Here, you get fed via direct mind download with pure and free Bitcoin knowledge.
FSN Radio. It's all about what's next. Go to financialsurvivalnetwork.com and sign up for your free weekly newsletter. You'll also get 3 free reports. The Financial Survival Network. It's all about what's next.
Welcome. You are listening to the Financial Survival Network. I'm Kerry Lutz. The date is June 21st, 2016. Hard to believe that the year is almost half over, but if you've been watching the price of Bitcoin, it has been gyrating all over the place. I mean, right now, as we speak, it's trading at $665.95 per Bitcoin in US dollars, that is. It was up just the other day to $775 per Bitcoin. I mean, you got to wonder what's going on in the world. What's causing it to go up like this? I mean, just a few months back, it was under $200 per Bitcoin. And to answer those questions you've been sending me and more, we've got Trace Mayer. You will find him at bitcoin.kn. And Trace, it's been a while, but it's really great to have you back on the show.
Oh, wonderful to be here again, Kerry.
Hey, so Bitcoin, we've been through a lot with Bitcoin over the past few years, haven't we?
Yeah. What was it? The first time I was on the show was like $5, I think.
Oh,
so
man, you told me to buy it, and I didn't listen, and I'm still kicking myself in the butt for it. But you know, getting past my self-loathing and lack of investment acumen, if you will, something is obviously going on in the world. And with Bitcoin, that's making it react this way, since gold is firmly manipulated or controlled, perhaps Bitcoin is now the canary in the coal mine, if you will.
Yeah, it's still very speculative. We're at about a $10 billion market cap. Gold's a $6 trillion market cap. So, you know, if you thought silver was small, Bitcoin's even smaller. But yeah, there's definitely a lot happening with it. And I do think that the central banks, as Alan Greenspan testified twice before Congress, they stand ready to lease gold should the price rise. So there is a concerted effort by the central banks to suppress the price. Why? Because it poses a threat to their fiat paper franchises. And so their power to issue what we use as currency is infinitely more valuable than the price of a portfolio asset. But when they try to engage in this economic censorship or this economic repression, Bitcoin is a whole new game, because you're dealing with a censorship-resistant technology, kind of like BitTorrent as opposed to Napster, but you're also dealing with an economic asset that you can take delivery of into the blockchain. And once you take delivery of it into the blockchain, you have instantly assayed both the quantity and the quality of it. So there's none of this like shipping bars around, shaving off a little bit, assaying it, figuring out whether you have gold or not, or tungsten or whatever. So Bitcoin is just this whole other animal that is bringing a radical form of transparency to the current system.
Yeah, and Mickey Fulp and I, we do a monthly major market review, and we put Bitcoin on that review. Every month we go over its gyrations, and now we've followed it back all the way to December 30th of 2011 when it was 472. So I'm following it year to year. December 31st, 1351. That's December 31st of 2012, December 31st of 757. And I'm doing this annual. I mean, we could go peaks and valleys. 1214, 319, 1215. We're looking at 430, and now last month, which was May 31st of 16, it was at 522.30. So we've had amazing volatility in this thing. I heard that some government had seized 25,000 Bitcoins and was dumping them on the market to try to put a damper on this thing. Did you hear anything about this?
I think it was the government of Australia. They had seized something like 25,000 Bitcoins from a dark web service. And, this gets a little bit more into, what is going into all of this, especially as the transactional supply dries up. It's very interesting. When Silk Road, when those coins got seized, over $100 million worth of Bitcoin, the price dropped to $60, but within a couple months it was up to $1,200. And I attribute this mainly to the price elasticity of demand component for the transactional supply-demand function of the Bitcoin currency. Because when we look at the supply and demand, there's two different types. There's speculative demand, which are people just chasing the rabbit, but then there's transactional demand, which is actual fundamental usage. And I wrote about this in an article in December of last year when Bitcoin was $385. I wrote an article, the fourth great Bitcoin bull market has arrived. And, since the price of Bitcoin has more than doubled, and I think we're just getting started. But, you talk about looking at that history. I've written articles at the beginning of all the major bull runs in Bitcoin, all the major bull markets. So, I'm intimately familiar with the fundamentals of what's going on with this stuff. And 25,000 Bitcoins is really nothing. You're not going to suppress any price in Bitcoin with a very small portion of Bitcoin like that.
So you just drive it down for a day or two, and then it's back to the races,
$25,000.
Yeah.
Well, 25,000 Bitcoins, you might be able to manipulate the price for 60 to 90 minutes, but that's about it.
Okay, so what's happening with Bitcoin in China? They seem to be extremely concerned there about the viability of the yuan.
Yeah, so big issues with the yuan. Second, they don't have anywhere to park excess capital, to park their savings. Go put it in the stock market, right? But they know that's completely rigged.
Real estate.
And there's also getting to be a lot of just fundamental use of Bitcoin. So you got import exporters. I was at the Latin American Bitcoin conference a few months ago, and the Brazilians it takes 45 days to get approval from the central bank to send a wire. You have to get approval on every single wire transfer that you do. And so they're actually now paying their Chinese suppliers of electronics with Bitcoins. And the Chinese, they don't want a wire in reals that gets turned into dollars, that gets turned into yuan that they can't then wire outside of China. So they'd rather just get Bitcoin. So, we're actually seeing Bitcoin being used in these trade situations. And that's primarily how the Chinese are doing that. And of course, there's the mining industry. The Chinese are basically getting a bunch of free power from their government connections that they use to run mining machines, and then they also build the mining chips there. So, and the mining industry is $1 billion a year industry already, or one of our largest industries in Bitcoin. And so they do a lot of mining. So you've got these two different components. They're basically using mining to get capital outside of China. They're using Bitcoin to not get capital into China in the first place, whether they're an import exporter. And then third, which I think is even smaller than the first two, is that they're just speculating on the price and not putting capital into the stock market.
Yeah. So it represents an investment alternative, and as a result, these people are effectively withdrawing Bitcoin out of the float, which therefore probably is having the effect of further driving up the price.
Yeah. So and I like that you want to talk about the float. So when Bitcoin hit its previous all-time high of like $1,200 a Bitcoin, the market cap was only about $14 billion total. And we're currently at a $10 billion market cap with only a $700 price, give or take. But there are approximately 2.5 million Bitcoins that have been lost, or perhaps even more. They just haven't moved at all. They're presumed to be lost. If you were to correct the previous all-time high for these lost Bitcoins, so if we're looking at if it were a stock like after dilution or whatever, then the all-time high would have been closer to about $687 a Bitcoin in current Bitcoin price. So, running to $780 is actually like an all-time high for Bitcoin in terms of actual value that's been moved into the system. And once we move into uncharted territory like that, then, who knows where it's going to stop like next time, right? Because this is going to be this up leg, this bull market that we're in is going to light your hair on fire. It's going to be huge.
Yeah, no doubt. So what we're talking about also is that the ultimate supply, the end supply of Bitcoins is fixed. We're not going to get any more of them.
Yeah, I mean, what would you do if gold went up 300%? Well, you would go out and you would invest in gold miners, and these gold miners would go and they'd bring online mines whose quality of ore is low enough that it's now economically profitable to bring these mines online. And so, after a couple year period, you would bring in a new supply of gold, which because you can do that when the price goes up. With Bitcoin, their supply is fixed. Period. By the protocol. There's only very little latitude in how mining works to bring production into the future, into the present from the future. And so when we're really looking at, these stock to flow ratios, we're looking at a very little amount of saleable Bitcoin, and that goes into calculating the price. And so is Bitcoin's first network effect of 7. There's 7 network effects I've identified. But the first one is speculation. As this first network effect takes root, it strengthens all the other ones. But Bitcoin is just barely beginning in that regard. It's only $10 billion market cap. Discover's got a market cap twice as much. Google's a 500 billion market cap. Apple's even more than that. Bitcoin is a completely empty storage tank for wealth, and yet it's portable, divisible, transferable, uniform, limited in amount. It has so many characteristics that people are finding useful, and they're beginning to use it.
Yeah. So I read recently one of the main developers of Bitcoin left because the limit of the number of transactions per minute that you can accomplish in Bitcoin was, or per second rather, was somewhere around 3 or 4 transactions per second. What's being done to increase the number of transactions, to increase the infrastructure, to build out the Bitcoin infrastructure for conducting commerce?
Yeah, so this is very kind of interesting. Mike Hearn was the developer we're talking about, and he's kind of like he's a second string player. He's not on the court as a starter, but he is like sitting on the bench waiting to go in if someone gets injured. And he's been around Bitcoin for a long time. When he made all this big hubbubaloo and fuss, and then decided to quit, he actually sold all his Bitcoins in advance of making these announcements. So in effect, he front run the market and screwed a bunch of people, other market participants. If it were a publicly traded company, it'd be illegal, basically. But morals and ethics aside, when he made his whiny rage quitting post, and Bram Cohen, who created BitTorrent, he wrote a post, whiny rage quit, to describe what Mike Hearn did. I sent out a tweet. I said, I see Mike Hearn's departure from Bitcoin as bullish. And we're actually up about 70% since Mike Hearn left. So, getting these second string, loudmouth, but fairly poor players who don't put very many points on the scoreboard, having them leave is actually much more conducive to the rest of the team functioning in a constructive and good manner. So it's good, I think, that Mike Hearn is gone. But some of his critique is valid in terms of, increasing Bitcoin scalability. It's just the method of how to go about doing that is different. And I think that his method is very intellectually lazy. It's not a real technological solution, whereas what is being worked on is going to be huge. We've got something called segregated witness, which is in final rounds of code testing and review right now. Should be able to get rolled out pretty soon. It'll fix something called transaction mailability. We also have just activated, this is code that went out 6, 7, 8 months ago, because we do stuff in a very slow, conservative, safe, tested manner so that it doesn't fail, like Ethereum and the DAO recently failed. And so this check sequence verify, between these two different pieces, we're going to be able to roll out something called the Lightning Network. And what the Lightning Network is going to do is it's going to be able to enable Bitcoin to be used for trillions of transactions per second if needed, right? Really? So we'll be able to do the entire New York Stock Exchange could be trading over Bitcoin in a trustless way. Visa, we could easily scale up Visa, MasterCard, Discover, all of them combined. Bitcoin will be able to handle all of that type of load and payload and transactions and all that type of stuff. Now, it won't necessarily go on the blockchain, but it'll be able to run still in a cryptographically trustworthy way as we compartmentalize the trust into different modules that can then still be fed back into the main blockchain. So, not to get too technological or too deep into it, but the bottom line is the scalability issue is definitely going to get fixed, and it's going to get fixed in a way that isn't just increasing throughput, but is actually increasing scalability and doing it in a way that we retain the censorship-resistant nature of the protocol, which I think is a fundamental value proposition of Bitcoin.
Absolutely crucial. Got to have that.
Yeah, absolutely crucial. Because you can build centralized systems on top of that, but you can't build a censorship-resistant system on top of a censorable foundation. Like, it just doesn't work. Like, look at Napster. Failed. Why? Because it's a centralized server. Even though it was, so you couldn't build something on top of Napster because you could just shut down Napster.
Mm-hmm. For sure. All right. Well, interesting things happening there. If the Chinese really get going on this, if large portions of the Earth's population who have any kind of assets start really getting scared about what's happening with the global financial system, Trace, this is just the beginning.
And the other thing is there is a huge, vibrant cash market for Bitcoin. To give you an idea, I was a seed round investor in both BitPay, the largest merchant processor, and Kraken, which is one of the largest Bitcoin exchanges. If you take the combined volume from BitPay and Kraken on a daily basis, the cash markets are doing multiples of that volume. So, I mean, there's a huge market where imagine if the gold market had this transactional velocity where people are buying and selling gold coins every day for physical cash. Yeah. That instead of speculating on the COMEX where we've got like 500 contracts for every 1 ounce in the vault. I mean, we'd actually be bringing real price discovery because guess what? When you're trading $100 bill or a $20 bill for some Bitcoins in person for cash, like you have to be given the Bitcoin. You're not going to stand for an IOU.
Yeah, absolutely. Hey, much rather have
it's probably $100 to $200 million a day of volume or liquidity that is just in the cash markets.
Yeah. So still relatively small markets, but
it's still
but they're building.
Bigger. Yeah, it's bigger than the Guatemalan peso, bigger than some of these other third and fourth tier currencies.
Sure.
And when the block reward halves in about 2 to 3 weeks, July 10th or so, the inflation rate of Bitcoin is going to be lower than all but probably 20 currencies in the world. So it's going to be one of the currencies with the lowest inflation rates.
Yeah. Well, in theory, we have to go back to the U.S. dollar from 1776 to 1913, where we had an inflation rate of 0.12% a month per year per annum. And that's over the entire time, including wars. But there were periods where inflation went way up and then it deflated, came back down to earth. But here we've got Bitcoin's value increasing, its purchasing price increasing, which means that the purchasing value of the other currencies is going down. Well, it's going to be interesting here to see what happens, how this thing really develops.
Yeah, well, I mean, to put some numbers on it, right? Like when Bitcoin ran from, let's say, $7 to $266, there were 7 million Bitcoins that had been mined and were in existence. There will be 21 million total. They'll be distributed between now and 2140, so 120 years from now. We've already mined 75%. There's 15.4 million Bitcoins total. In 3 weeks, the number of new Bitcoins is going to decline from 3,600 Bitcoins per day to 1,800 Bitcoins per day.
Really?
And then in about 4 years, it'll decline to only 900 Bitcoins a day. So, we're going from inflation rates that were 50% a year, down to like 40%, 30%. Then we had these big run-ups to $1,200. The inflation rate was still 25%, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
When the block reward halves in a couple weeks, the inflation rate's going to be less than 5%.
Oh, we shouldn't call it inflation. We should call it the
it's the
money supply.
It's that's the definition, right, from the Austrian school. Inflation is an increase in the money supply, and deflation is a decrease in the money supply. Because when we look at inflation, there's 8 different types of inflation that people will talk about. There's price inflation, there's increase or decrease in the money supply, which is the traditional definition under the Austrian school, and there's several others. But when we look at the actual new emission of currency units, how many Yellen coins get printed every month? How many Draghi coins get printed every month?
Every minute of the day.
And we can't even prove how many are actually out there and in existence. And then North Korea makes a plate and starts stamping out more Yellen coins, just for the fun of it. So Bitcoin is very fascinating in this regard. And that we've got the stock of Bitcoin out there, and it's pretty well established. Like, those are strong hands, because it's equity-based instrument. Yeah. So all the Bitcoins have to be bought and paid for pretty much. Mm-hmm. The only thing you can do is create fake Bitcoins if you're an exchange running a fractional system. But then when that implodes, people have to go and get real Bitcoins. And so it's going to be very exciting to see what happens when this supply of new Bitcoins shrinks, because in order to meet the transactional demand, the use of Bitcoin on a daily basis, where the price elasticity of demand is very close to zero, where do we get the supply? And last time the block reward halved, it went from $7 to $266 within about a 3-month period. When Silk Road got seized, it went from $60 to $1,200 in a 2 to 3 month period. So I think it's going to take a few months to actually find and reach a new equilibrium price, and then we'll be able to have the speculation up and down. But where that new price is going to be met at, I just think it's going to be substantially higher than where it's been at 385.
Yeah, I think you're right.
And hence why I wrote the article, 7 months ago.
Hey, you were spot on. So just tell us websites, where we find you, where we read your work.
Yeah, so I interview a lot of people in the Bitcoin space at my podcast. It's www.bitcoin.kn. And if people want to learn how to buy Bitcoin or store them, or get, if they need a new introductory site, there's bitcoin.org. And there's also weusecoins.com. And those will help people get started in Bitcoin.
All right. Sounds great. Always great talking to you, Trace. Been too long. We'll talk to you again real soon. And hey, just a whole new experience, and we're having a lot of fun with it for sure. So be well and stay in touch.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me. And just strap in, kick the tires, and light the fires.
Will do.
FSN Radio. It's all about what's next. Go to financialsurvivalnetwork.com and sign up for your free weekly newsletter. You'll also get 3 free reports. The Financial Survival Network. It's all about what's next.
Be sure to get a copy of the free Bitcoin Guide at freebitcoinguide.com. Got a question or suggestion? Record your voice at bitcoin.kn. Don't be shy. To help the show, share bitcoin.kn with friends, post about it on Reddit, and otherwise spam the interwebs. Your iTunes comments and 5-star reviews are very important to us. Please continue tuning in to the Bitcoin Knowledge Podcast, where we release interviews with the top people in the Bitcoin world. Now take some choline and let that Bitcoin knowledge consolidate.